I believe that design and branding have as much power now as any other major behavioral discipline of our lives. We use design and branding to signify who we are, what we believe, what we're most committed to. And I have not used AI personally. My students are using it. Where it's most interesting to see what they're doing with it is how they can create future possibilities with specific prompts that allow them to visualize their ideas.
Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my pleasure to have Debbie Millman with us. Debbie was named one of the most innovative, creative people in business by Fast Company, one of the most influential designers working today by Graphic Design USA, and a woman of influence by Success Magazine. She's an author, educator, curator, and podcast pioneer. Debbie is the host of the Webby Award-winning podcast Design Matters, one of the first and longest-running podcasts in the world. She's chair of the first ever Masters in Branding program at the School of Visual Arts, co-owner and editorial director at printmag.com, and the author of 7 books on design and branding. She's also the recipient of a Cooper Hewitt National Design Award and a Lifetime Achievement Award from AIGA, the Professional Association for Design. Debbie, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So you've won a number of awards and some recognition. I'm curious to hear how that unfolded for you. It's those are quite some honors you've gotten.
I guess after 40 years in the business, people maybe felt that I was worthy of those things. I don't know. It's, my success came much later in life. I did not have a lot of success out of the gate, and really have just worked hard. And I'm very, very grateful that a couple of people have noticed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. More than a couple of people, but yeah, that's awesome. And you've been podcasting for quite a while. What's the story behind that?
Well, back in 2004, I was the president and one of the partners at a branding consultancy called Sterling Brands. And at that point in my career, I was about 13, 14 years into my career before I got to Sterling. And at that point, had really struggled quite a bit in that first decade or so. And when I got to Sterling, it was really the first time that I became, financially successful and was acknowledged in the organization as a success through a number of promotions. And because that was so unusual for me, I really gave it even more than I had already been giving it, and had abandoned a lot of the more creative things that I was doing for this more commercial work and more corporate work. And after about a decade of doing that, I began to feel that maybe I had lost some of my creative spirit, or maybe all of it, and wanted some sort of outside endeavor that was not really consumed with marketplace position and a return on an investment. I wanted something a little bit purer. And I got this opportunity to host a radio show on Voice America. I thought they were offering me a job, but they were really offering me an opportunity to pay them for the airtime. Yeah. But I decided to do it anyway. And that will tell you the level of desperation I had for doing something less commercial, more creative. And I started the show in 2005. 2009, I moved the show to Design Observer. And in 2019, joined the TED Audio Collective. And so next year it'll be 20 years wow. Podcasting. Yeah.
How many episodes is that?
I have lost count, and because we also do some repeats, so it's very hard to say, but I would say it's probably close to 600 at this point.
Good for you. Awesome. And what's been what stands out in your mind as the best episode that you've ever done?
Oh, I couldn't tell you that. There are so many for so many different reasons. I've loved interviewing Tim Ferriss. We have a wonderful chemistry and rapport. We've interviewed each other on each other's podcasts. We've shared some very deep and soulful conversations on both our podcasts. I've interviewed Chris Ware, who I think is a genius. I've interviewed my wife, who I met through an invitation to be on the podcast. Stephen Heller, who is the person who I've interviewed more times than anybody else. I think at this point it's about 14 times in 19 years, maybe even more. So there's Thomas Kail, the director of Hamilton, was an extraordinary interview from my perspective. Jason Reynolds made me cry. Glennon Doyle and Abby Wambach made me laugh. So there's so many. It's hard to say.
So what did Glennon Doyle say that made you laugh?
We were, I couldn't tell you specifically. I just remember we had a lot of fun talking about the patriarchy and talking about what it means to stand up for yourself and how they got together, because Glennon and Abby are married, and how Roxanne and I got together and things like that.
Wow. That's cool. And what was it about your interview? Well, I guess since you've been interviewed by Tim, let's start there. So what was I don't know, what was the nugget that you shared, the wisdom nugget with Tim that really made the episode amazing? I'm curious if you can recall that.
Have you listened to the episode
No,
or any
I'm
of the
just looking at the
episodes?
page. It's from 2017, so it was a while ago.
Well, no, that was the first, probably the first one. The more recent one was where we shared our histories of sexual abuse.
Oh, wow. So if you could distill into a sentence or two a bit of life advice that you might have shared either with Tim or that Tim shared with you, what might that be?
Believe survivors when they tell you that they have experienced any kind of abuse or assault,
Hmm.
and that
Yeah.
there is life after that as well, meaningful life.
Yeah. Wow. Well, amazing that you are willing to go out on a limb and share your experience and with vulnerability, help people to, find their own path and work on their own healing.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah,
Well, I
kudos
owe
to you.
that to Tim. Tim is an extraordinary human being, really uses um, his platform, I guess, for lack of a better term, to really help people become stronger. And I have learned a lot from him and been the recipient of many of his generosities. I guess that's the best way to put it.
Yeah. So, how do you use your platform to help people become stronger?
Well, I'm on the board of the Joyful Heart Foundation, which is a foundation that the actress and activist Mariska Hargitay started 20 years ago.
Hmm.
She started that a few years after starring on the TV show Law and Order SVU, which she still stars in. And she had been getting quite a lot of letters from people that were watching the show about their experience. And she decided to start a foundation to raise funds to help eradicate sexual assault, domestic violence, and child abuse, as well as more recently, she's worked very hard to end the rape kit backlog in our time. She created an Emmy award winning documentary called I Am Evidence, which is all about the rape kit backlog. And I have been on the board for about 10 years. And for 5 of those, I was the chair of the board and have worked to um, redesign and reposition the organization, redesign the identity, redesign the website, and help reposition the organization to create a real roadmap for growth.
Mm, that's awesome. And do you feel like it was kind of like destiny or synchronicity that got you to start the podcast and got you onto this path?
Sometimes I think that. I think it's a combination of opportunity and timing and effort. So if you keep doing it every day or as often as you can and practice and practice and practice, that eventually your number will land on the wheel, so to speak, of life. But you have to keep playing, you have to keep doing it. And so I think it's a combination of both. And I do feel very fortunate because I do think there are people that keep trying and keep trying and keep trying, and that number feels like it's not ever going to show up. But I do feel like in many ways mine has a number of times. And whether that's serendipity or luck or grace or the manifestation of hard work, it's hard to say.
Sure. So you're president emeritus of AIGA, and
Yes.
I know of AIGA. I've been familiar with them, just somewhat familiar with them for decades. They've been around for a long time, and it's quite an honor to be president emeritus. What how did that come about? What's been your involvement lately, if any, with AIGA, and where do you think that organization's heading?
I've been a member of AIJ since 1998 and actually was part of a brand experience special interest group in my early tenure with the organization, but then sort of got rejected from it, which resulted in my feeling very down about myself. But I do have to say, I still continue to be involved. And in 2004, I think, Emily Oberman, the great legendary designer, Emily Oberman, at the time was president of the New York chapter. And she invited me to join the New York chapter, which I did. And I did that for 2 years. And then I was invited by Sean Adams to join the national board, which I did for another 3 years. And then I was asked to be president, which I did from 2009 to 2011. And in that time, I visited all the chapters. There were 66 chapters at that time, and I visited them all. That included South Dakota and Alaska and
Wow.
Hawaii and the 5 chapters in California and the 4 in Florida. And it was wonderful. I really enjoyed doing that. I was on a mission to create a sense of inclusivity as opposed to exclusivity within the membership. I've spent a lot of time with students as well because students make up a really big percentage of the members, and essentially felt that I, in my time there, helped establish their social media presence. And from 2009 to 2011, it was a very different world than it is now.
Yeah.
My involvement now, I was just the chair, not the chair, the host of their most recent AIGA conference, which was in October and was one of the most successful and well attended conferences they've ever had. So I'm super excited about that. And they've had some trouble. I'm not on the board right now. And while I'm still a member, I'm not part of the executive leadership. And they've had some stumbles. And I was asked recently to help them begin to navigate out of those troubles. The COVID really hit them hard, change in leadership, financial issues. But I think they're back on the right path to solvency and relevancy.
Yeah. And they had some big events too, like back in the day, design
Oh yeah, I
conference
mean
and
they
stuff.
still do, and they still, I think, mean a lot to a lot of people. So hopefully, um, their roadmap for growth will be robust.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So you have a book called Why Design Matters, and which is kind of relevant to what we've been talking about with AIGA. And how AIGA needs to stay relevant. They need to, keep up with the times, and AI is certainly changing uh, design and the way that designers interact with their clients and produce results for their clients. I'm curious to hear your take on where design is headed and why design matters and how your book ties into all that.
Well, the book is really a collection of interviews that I've done on Design Matters for, at that point, the book came out in 2022. And so it was the best of interviews that I chose up until that time that the book
Mhm.
was published. And so, what I really wanted to communicate is that design is in every aspect of our life. All of our decisions are designed. We are creating the lives that we want to make. And the hope for the book was to show how some of the world's most creative people create and design the arc of their life to be able to make and create these really exceptional, remarkable things. And so it featured, I think, 55 interviews that I curated from the archives to really help people understand the paths that these people have taken, their origin stories. What were some of the obstacles that they overcame? How did they do that? How did they risk? What kind of risk taking did they undertake to do something new that hadn't been done before? What kind of experiments did they have to also undertake to be able to result in the kind of work that they were doing? How did it feel? How did they overcome rejection and frustration or failure? And so that was really the main tenet of the book, to talk about why design mattered to the way that these people created their lives. In
Mhm.
terms of overall, every decision we make and everything that we see in the world now, aside from nature, is designed, it's created.
Mhm.
And we communicate through a series of symbols. We are able to telegraph our identities through the things that we wear, the things that we carry with us. We are communicating now more and more via symbols with emojis and all kinds of marks. We create logos. We put logos on pretty much everything now. There are logos on toilet bowls, for example. So I believe that design and branding have as much power now as any other major behavioral discipline of our lives, and that we use design and branding to signify who we are, what we believe, what we're most committed to, and use a lot of those symbols to find like-minded people that we can experience those values with.
Mhm. Yeah, beautifully said. So, how is AI uh, aiding in this, and or perhaps detracting from it?
I am not a futurist. I'm more of an analyst. I like to look at the past to be able to understand how we got to this moment in time.
Mhm.
That being said, I'm certainly aware of what's happening with AI. And I think that I just know enough to be dangerous, I think, in terms of spouting any kind of advice or information or knowledge. I think that Marion Banshees is talking about AI and writing about AI in a very compelling manner. I think Poom Lefebvre from Design Army is doing some extraordinary things with AI and the creation of some of the advertising and design work that she's doing. Um, I I have not used AI personally, but I can tell you that my students are using it, and where it's most interesting to see what they're doing with it is how they can create future possibilities with specific prompts that allow them to visualize their ideas. And I think that's really, really interesting. And I'm very, very um, fascinated by what they're coming up with. But in terms of AI taking over human jobs, or AI becoming sentient, or AI becoming something that results in our living in a world of Terminator 2. Those are things that I couldn't weigh in on.
Yeah. No, no problem.
Though I'd love to know the answers to those questions too.
Yeah. Well, the best way to predict the future is to create it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what's your favorite book that because you have six, right?
I have seven.
Seven.
Favorite. Ooh, that's a tough question. Um, I think it might be Self Portrait as Your Trader, because it was my most experimental book. It's my most personal book. It's a book of illustrated essays, and it's entirely created by hand. Yeah, I think Self Portrait, because I share a lot of personal stories. I created all the art over many years, and it was a risk to publish it, but I'm glad I did.
And did you get a publisher or did you
Oh
self-publish?
yeah, all my books have been through publishers. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that book, was it hard to get a publisher did you get like an agent to help you land a
I
publisher?
didn't. My first six books were agentless, but my last book, Why Design Matters, and any future work that I'm doing, I'm represented by Charlotte Cheedy, who is a legendary agent, and she is an extraordinary human being, one of the great human beings on this planet. But those first books were all as a result of, aside from one, um, publishing companies coming to me to ask me if I was interested in writing them. So my first book, How to Think Like a Great Graphic Designer, was referred to me by Stephen Heller, who is my co-founder in the branding program. This was prior to that happening, though. He was offered an opportunity to write that book with that title from Allworth Press, but he passed on it and suggested that they come to me to see if
Mm.
I would be interested in writing it, and I was. And so that was my first book, which came out in 2007. My second book was a textbook of sorts called Essential Principles of Graphic Design. And that was published by Quarto Press. And they also came to me about that book. And then, based on the success of How to Think Like a Great Graphic Designer, Allworth wanted me to do a sequel of sorts, but I wasn't really interested in doing a part two. So what I did was, essentially, the first book was interviews with designers, and then Brand Thinking and Other Noble Pursuits was interviews with brand practitioners like Seth Godin and Malcolm Gladwell, and really brilliant people thinking about design and, I'm sorry, branding and culture.
Hmm.
Then my fourth book was a book that Rockport Press came to me to do, and that was Brand Bible, and that I did with my students in 2011. And so that was I really more edited that book than wrote it, because my students and my faculty put that together, and then I edited it. And then Look Both Ways and Self Portrait were published by F&W, and the first book I pitched to them. So that's the one book that I did pitch to them that I mentioned. But then the second book came about as a result of my wanting to continue the visual essays that I had started with with Look Both Ways, which are illustrated essays on graphic design and life. And I wanted to keep my chops. I had worked for a year and a half on that book. And so I wanted to keep those muscles sort of in shape. And so I kept doing essays, visual essays that I was publishing on printmagazine.com. And then the publisher of Print Magazine said, "Hey, these are, after 3 years of doing that, would you like to collect your best of and create a book from them?" And that was Self Portrait.
Okay. And you've done like a card deck as well, right?
Yeah. Yes, I did. I might do another, actually. I'm talking to the folks that put that together. I did a card deck of playing cards, and then I also did a card deck called The 10-Year Plan to a Remarkable Life. And that was most recently done with Chronicle. And they did approach me for that as well.
Wow. So if you do another deck, what do you think it will be?
I don't know. I'm working on coming up with a number of different ideas. Um, so I'm not sure. But the card deck I really wanted to do with Deck Starter. I had always wanted to do a deck of cards. I'd actually like to do some sort of a game, and so who knows? Watch this space. We'll see.
Cool. Awesome. So how do you take what you're doing with print, with books, with card decks, and so forth, and then uh, turn that into something that's an online experience for people? Because passively reading a book, you hope that they apply what they learned in the book, but you can be more experiential and gamify more an online experience. So I'm curious if there's anything remarkable that you want to talk
Well,
about
I'm
in
one of
terms of an
the
online experience for your students and fan base.
Well, my program is hybrid. So it is both an online experience and an on site experience. So we have to be able to create our curriculum and syllabus and so forth with both an online experience and an on site experience together. And so that came about as of COVID. We went completely online in mid March of 2020. And while it was an intellectually challenging experience for me, only because I'm not particularly tech oriented, we were able to very quickly, like within days, get up and running on Zoom, on Canvas, on Slack. And we had the second half of the year, despite what was happening in the world, we had a very, very successful year. The next year we did completely online. And because of those really successful experiences, we decided to make the program hybrid so that we could allow people that weren't able to travel or couldn't afford to live in New York to be able to participate and take the program. So that's been a really interesting experience. Also, I was able to acquire printmagazine.com and the archives of print in their entirety with 6 partners, or 5, including me, so 6 together, in 2019. And that's a completely online experience now.
Mm.
And I love it. I love being able to have this way of publishing that's very immediate, very up to the moment, and allows people anywhere in the world at any time of the world to see everything that we've ever published on the site.
It's kind of ironic, though, isn't it, that it's online only for something that is celebrating print?
Called print, yeah. Well, we print was going out of business. The company, the company that owned it,
Yeah.
I should say. And print because I had worked on it with those publishers, I knew that it was still profitable. It just wasn't profitable enough for them. And so Stephen Heller, Laura Desenfant, Deb Aldridge, Jessica Desio, Andrew Gibbs, and myself all acquired the assets and archives of print out of bankruptcy because we felt that it was a national treasure and it was important to preserve. And that's what our main goal is. Will we ever be able to print another printed magazine? Maybe. Maybe we'll do an annual. Maybe we'll do something quarterly. It's very hard to say.
Yeah.
But right now, what we're hoping to be able to do is put all the archives of all the magazines going back 80 plus years online. And we're working to be able to do that so you can see all the great work from the 1920s on, things that were made by Paul Rand and Milton Glaser and Saul Bass and Seymour Quast. And I mean, the list goes on and on and on, the people that have contributed to the magazine over the decades. And so that's one of our goals eventually, once we raise enough money to do that. But then the other is to reintroduce print to a whole new audience through really robust writing and reportage. And we have about, I think, 15 columnists that are contributing original work to us. Seymour Quast is still doing a monthly illustration. I have 2 columns on the site. Steve Heller still writes the Daily Heller every day.
Wow.
So I'm really proud of what we're doing, whether or not it's in a printed publication or not.
Yeah, that's great. Your mission and your colleague's mission there is reminiscent of Brewster Kahl's mission. You know who Brewster Kahl is?
I don't.
He's the founder of the Internet Archive.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would say it's quite that noble, but I'd like to think that we're in the same model.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's amazing. That's really cool. So, if you had, let's say, some wisdom to share from all that experience working with all these great people, not just folks you've interviewed, but folks you worked with in a business context or been on boards together and so forth, like Stephen Heller and so forth. What would be some of the best gems that you've gotten from working with these folks?
Well, with Steve, I would say there is real power in publishing every day. And I've watched over the years how he shows up for other people,
Mhm.
the generosity that he has with his students, with his colleagues, with his peers, with his audience. He's probably one of the most impactful people in my life in terms of helping me with my first book deal, co-founding the Masters in Branding program with me, co-founding many of the more progressive graduate programs at the School of Visual Arts. Seth Godin has been a mentor to me for many years. We just collaborated on a project, which I'm super excited about.
Yeah, he writes every day too, Seth Godin.
He writes every day too. He writes 7 days a week. Steve writes 5 days a week. Seth has an incredible newsletter, which if everybody listening isn't already subscribing to, I highly recommend subscribing to it because every day you get a gem. And so he's someone who's also been on the podcast, I think about 4 times, and has been in what I've really realized from these extraordinarily talented people. They're also mostly very generous. And I think that's real power is when you can share it with others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, amazing. And you can change lots of lives and really
Yeah,
impact the world. Yeah.
absolutely.
So what's next for you? What are you working on that most excites you? Maybe something that you're not even telling the world about yet.
Yeah. Well, I haven't really. So I've done a couple of really cool art projects over the last couple of years. One is a project that I did for the Broadway Museum, where I did a big installation. I created two massive pieces of art that's a permanent installation in the Broadway Museum, which is um, honoring 550 people who lost their lives during the AIDS crisis in the Broadway community in the 80s. And what I did was I hand illustrated, drew, hand lettered all of their names. And so that is essentially wallpapering 2 very large walls in the Broadway Museum. And that's a lot of the kind of work that I want to be doing moving forward. And I just finished a project that'll be launched probably in the next couple of weeks with NASA and the Jet Propulsion Lab, JPL, at Caltech, which is another piece of art that I created that's actually going to space. And so I can't say more than that at the moment because it hasn't been released to the public, but I'm very excited about that. And then I collaborated with Seth Godin, as I mentioned, on a project utilizing 365 of some of his best quotes from his newsletter. And that'll be out in towards the end of the year. And because it's 365 days, I think you could probably get a sense of what it is. And that'll be out towards the end of the year. And I'm super excited about that too. Those were probably 2 of my most fun projects. Oh, and I have another project that I'll hopefully be starting, another book that's more of another visual book, and that is going to be about gardening.
Oh, cool. On my other podcast, which is a personal development podcast, I had an amazing gardener on, and she's an author about gardening. Um, yeah, and Fran Soren is her name, and yeah, there's a lot of life advice that a gardener can offer based on
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
understanding
Alyssa Altman, I think.
how gardening can it's just a mirror for life, really.
Absolutely. Alyssa Altman, the great writer Alyssa Altman, says that gardening is a contract with hope. I love that.
That's cool. Yeah, I like that. So, since this is a marketing podcast, from a marketing and branding standpoint, what are some of the musts or the really should do's for our listener to implement in whatever campaign or initiative or movement that they're trying to establish? What are some of the things that would be a must have, or at least a really nice thing to have?
Well, I think the most important thing is a reason for being. Why are you doing this? If you're doing it because somebody else is doing it and it was successful, it's not going to be as successful. And it's just going to look like a Me Too product or idea.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing I would say is have a reason for being that is unique. What is the benefit of whatever it is you're making? People are going to be spending money. You're asking them to spend money on something that you're making. What are you giving them? People aren't as interested now with the different flavor, different form of shape of bottle as they are, and how is this going to make a difference in my life? How is this going to, at least for the moments that I'm using it, make me feel better about what I'm doing or who I am or what I'm capable of, or just how I feel in my body? So I would say that that's very, very important. And I also think that corporations need to stand for something, and they need to believe, they need to have values, they need to have vision, they need to have a point of view, and they need to be able to share that because consumers want that more and more. They want to understand what the company's DNA is so that they know whether or not they want to support those companies.
Yeah. So, what are some
So those
examples?
are two things that I think are super important. What's that? I'm sorry.
What are some examples of companies with really great DNA that they convey
There aren't very
effectively?
many. There aren't very many because companies, if they're public, have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. And that means that they are really putting profit before anything else. And when you do that, you are on a very slippery slope because you have a financial fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders, but also want to feel that you're communicating with your audience in a way that they want to hear. And so the only company that I can tell you that I think really puts their money where their mouth is, so to speak, is Patagonia. I think that Nike did a really good job in their support of Colin Kaepernick because that was very risky. A lot of companies aren't willing to do that. They're not willing to be controversial. Look what happened with Bud and how they supported a trans artist and then took it all back because of the backlash. That's worse than not doing anything at all, is when you actually do something and retract it because people are angry with you. So I think that companies that are willing to take a risk and willing to stand up for something that they believe in, whether or not it's popular with the entire universe, is something that more and more companies are going to have to get comfortable with.
Yeah. You got to be willing to polarize people, take a stand, and be okay with haters. It's easy to say, hard to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a book by Jay Baer called "Hug Your Haters." he was a guest on this podcast. He's a friend.
Yeah, Dylan Marin has a podcast about that and conversations with people that hate me. It's fantastic.
Oh, that's funny. And then there's a segment. Is it? Gosh, which late night show is it? But it's tweets from people that.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I love that one too.
Yeah, I
Yep.
forget what it's called exactly, but I'll have to find it and put it in the show notes for this episode. So,
That'd be great.
so what would be some examples of things where you've taken what looks like a shit sandwich, you know, and it's something that's I don't know, a troll or some terrible attack, and turned it into something really good. Like, turning turning lemons into lemonade. What would be an example, maybe from your own life or business, or perhaps from a friend or clients or colleagues?
Well, I had one of those experiences back in 2003 after I got rejected from the AIGA. I discovered that there was an article on a then very, very popular design blog, the first ever design blog, and it was called Speak Up. And people were criticizing AIGA for associating with me because they thought that I was, I think the words were a she-devil, for doing branding and corporate work.
Hmm.
And little did they know that I had already been rejected from AIGA. So here I was in this moment, sort of being hated by both the new upstarts in the design community, the bloggers, and the more Tony design organization that had been around for 90 something years at that point. And I ended up entering the conversation online and trying very respectfully to outline my points of view that they were attacking and why I believe the things that I believe. And at the time, it was devastating. It was one of the most challenging experiences that I had ever been through because I really did feel at that moment the most hated person in the design business. You know, the young upstarts hated me, and the Tony established designers hated me. But then through my discourse online with these folks and subsequent involvement, it turned out to be one of the defining moments of my life. And I can say that almost every opportunity that's come since 2003, I can thread back to that article on Speak Up.
Hmm.
So definitely not only lemonade out of lemons, I would say lemon chiffon pie out of lemons.
my my wife has this expression I love. That's it's a gift, but sometimes the bow is on the bottom. And sounds like maybe that was an incredible gift that at the time looked not so much like a gift. The bow was on the bottom, but turned out to be uh, quite destiny changing for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, at the time, I thought it was the worst moment of my life,
Yeah.
or my adult life, my professional life. And it turned out to be the most significant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you feel like that might have been, I don't know, preordained or something that you kind of volunteered for before you even incarnated? I know that's kind of a
It's a great
metaphysical
question.
question there for you.
Yeah. I kind of like to think so,
Yeah.
but I don't know. Because, I think deep in my heart, I am more of a Big Bang kind of person. So, but then again, there's a lot of magic in the world. So who knows?
Yeah. Okay. And how did it come about that you won a Webby Award, right? You have to get nominated and everything. How did that?
No, you have to enter your wares. I
Okay.
entered my podcast.
Yeah.
I had been entering for years and years and years. And there's two ways to win. One is through the judges
Mhm.
that your peers in the community decide who the best podcasters are and what the best podcast shows are and so forth. And then there's also an opportunity to have the people's choice. And I had, prior to this year, nominated or not nominated, registered or entered my podcast 8 previous times
Okay.
and had not ever won. I was nominated but never won the actual physical award, sort of like the Susan Lucci of the daytime Emmys.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally this year, I got one in each category. I got one from my peers in the judges of the Webbies, and then one from the people, a People's Choice Award and a Webby Judges Award. So that was really nice.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a year off from entering anymore because I just want to I want to sort of rest on my laurels of
Yeah.
those two.
Yeah. I don't know if vindication is the right word, but certainly it's good. Uh, it's encouraging to know that you're
Yeah.
appreciated. And so,
With
yeah.
the Webbies, when you win, you get the opportunity to submit a 5-word speech. They only allow you to, no matter who you are, no matter how famous, 5 words. That's the acceptance speech. And because there are so many awards, you have to submit what you're going to say if you are, and if you're chosen, you get to go on stage and say your speech. And of course, for me, it was 10 nominations, first win, thanks. They chose me and I got to say that. So that was nice.
Oh, funny. Yeah, ninth time was the charm or whatever.
Yeah, 9th and 10th.
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
So what's kind of your dream list of guests for your podcast that you haven't had on yet that you're just like dying to have on?
Lin-Manuel Miranda, Neil Gaiman, Barbara Streisand, Michelle Obama, Rachel Maddow, Questlove. Yeah, that's a good start.
Okay.
Those are all people I've written to and asked to be on the show. I have gotten responses from all of their people. So who knows? There's a possibility in the future. We'll keep our fingers crossed because, it's hard to say that they'll say yes.
Yeah. Do you send out the pitches or the invites yourself? Or
Oh, yeah. I do it all myself.
Okay.
All of it.
And so what's your process? Because there are a lot of firms, agencies out there that will pitch to get on podcasts. I'm sure you've gotten plenty, like.
Oh yeah, I get maybe 10 or 20 a day,
Yeah, right.
10 or 20 a day about being on the show. Mostly I go after the people I want to interview. Every now and then I will get a pitch from somebody that I do really, really want to interview. But my show is a long form, hour and a half, deep dive, heavily researched podcast. I'm not interested in a 20-minute talk about their latest book or their latest album or their latest show. That's just not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in really understanding how they became who they are. So when I get a pitch from a PR agency or an agent, I have to make sure they understand that I'm not just going to talk about the project, and they have to alert their client that this is a different podcast from maybe the other things that they're pitching. And so that tends to be why I tend to go after folks, because when I pitch those people, it's all there. It's all my process and what I do and examples and so forth. So when I get pitched and I'm interested, like for example, a recent episode in 2023 was with Kara Sedgwick, and she's very famous, and I love that I was invited to interview her. But I also didn't know if she knew the show and if she was going to be expecting to get questions about, her days on Days of Our Lives, the soap opera. And so I wrote back to the PR agent. I said, yes, but this is the show. This is how I do it. And I need this much time and so on and so forth. And really wasn't expecting to hear back. I wasn't even expecting to get a no. I was expecting to get crickets. Mm-hmm. But then she wrote back and said, no, Kara would love to do this and would love to be on the show. And so we had a great conversation. The interesting thing with PR agents is that I have to make sure that their clients really understand what I'm trying to do and want to do it with me.
Yeah. So what's an example or two of questions that you're pretty sure no other podcaster on the planet asks your guests?
That's not the kind of question I'll ask. What I do is a tremendous amount of research, probably 40 hours per show.
Wow.
And I read as much as I can about them. I take existing podcast interviews that they've been on and I have them transcribed so I can read them. And then what I do is I craft a narrative arc that starts from their origin story that continues through to what they're doing now, asking questions about things they've talked about already, but going deeper. So I don't have any cookie cutter questions. There's no question like, tell me about your first whatever. It's all based on things that they've said already that I can ask them about, or questions about things that they've said or done that I haven't heard asked before. So what I want to be able to do is come to an interview with questions that keep my guest engaged, that they're not thinking, oh, they read that from Wikipedia, or, oh, they took that directly from my website, or, I try to come up with really original questions for every guest that I interview.
That is quite a commitment. Wow.
It is. And sometimes I'm like, why am I doing this? But that's the only way I can do it now.
Yeah.
I used to start with more canned questions. If you listen to my shows back from 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, one question I'd love to ask was, what is your first creative memory? But I don't ask that anymore.
Gotcha. Yeah. I don't have prepared questions either. I just kind of receive.
Oh, no. I have prepared questions. I have 10 pages of questions ready to go, but they're
But
based on
they're
very
customized.
specific things. Yeah.
Gotcha.
I would never, ever go into an interview with anyone without questions and research done in advance, because I think it's disrespectful to who I'm talking to. The last thing you want to do is have a conversation with somebody who's been asked those same questions. Then they're just like, ugh, when is this going to be over? And I don't want them to ever feel that way.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, for me, I do it differently because I receive stuff. I'm receiving guidance and intuition as I'm interviewing. And
really, so what have you gotten from what kind of intuitive sense have you gotten from our conversation?
Yeah, so when I asked you questions about AIGA, when I asked you questions about the company's DNA, of examples of folks who are doing it well and stuff like that, I'm just tuned in to my intuition, that still small voice. And so when I have this shows more on my other podcast, which is a personal development spirituality podcast, and in those interviews, it's coming fast.
So are you a medium?
I've yes and no. I put up a kind of a boundary of what I allow in, only divine and sacred. So I'm not going to talk to somebody's great grandma because I don't know how divine and sacred she is. So yeah, I don't really do mediumship. I did kind of do that, but before I was agnostic, and then I had a big spiritual experience. This again is
Oh, tell me about
very
that.
much
Tell me
on
about
the
your
other show,
spiritual experience.
like seeing in the Matrix and all that sort of stuff. Is stuff that I talk about on the other podcast. Get yourself optimized, but yeah, it's been quite a ride. And what I recognize in doing, I've been doing these podcasts for 8 years now, the 2 shows, that the more I just surrender, let go and let God, the better the questioning and the better the experience and the more light is revealed. So if I had canned questions, which I don't believe in anyways, asking the same questions for each interview and stuff. And I know there are some successful podcasters that do that. That just does not resonate at all. But even
Yeah,
just having pre-prepared questions means that I've kind of constrained the magic, so I'm not going to allow an unfolding. And the most
sure.
incredible conversations come about in ways that I had no idea. Like, somebody is an expert on, I don't know, mold, let's say, like a world expert on toxic mold. And we'll not talk much about toxic mold, but we'll talk about these like spiritual epiphanies and stuff in the taking up the entire episode. So I just, I let go and let God.
It's cool. Very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun. So I know we're getting close to time. So if there is any kind of like last nugget or a bit of wisdom that you want to share for our listener, our viewer, in terms of life experience, in terms of design, branding, marketing, uh, intuition, whatever it is, what would that be?
Well, I love the question about lemons and lemonade. And I think that for people that are climbing the mountain of their lives, that I think it's more enjoyable to take slow steps up that mountain as opposed to run. So this way you get an opportunity to pick the lemons, make the lemonade, and then turn all of that into lemon chiffon pie.
Yeah, lemon chiffon
And
pie.
so that
I
would be
like
my
that.
advice. Recognize that all of the steps lead you to becoming who you are.
Yeah. Who was it that said that you can only connect the dots looking backwards? Was that Steve Jobs?
I don't know, but that's a good line.
Yeah. Awesome. And then where do our listeners go to get your books and maybe take courses or whatever you have, or work with you directly if that's an option? Where do you send them?
Mostly you can get all my information on my website, which is debbiemillman.com. And that also takes you directly to a link to listen to the podcast. So all the shows are there. You can also listen to the show on any podcast platform. And yeah, I think that's the best way. On Instagram, I'm Debbie Millman as well.
Yep. And
So
it's Debbie, not Y.
yes, Debbie, DebbieMillman.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you, Debbie. Thank you, listener. We'll catch you on the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.